September. One man vanished from one of Britain's largest prisons. Daniel Khalif was a former British soldier awaiting trial on espionage charges for spying for Iran. On the morning of September 6th, he strapped himself to the underside of a delivery van using a makeshift sling made from kitchen trousers and disappeared from one of the most heavily guarded facilities in England. But this isn't just a story about a prison escape. It's about the crude harness built from uniform trousers that no one noticed. It's about the 3 days he spent hiding in plain sight in one of the most surveilled cities on Earth. And it's about the 81 security failures that investigators uncovered after he was gone. He was caught 11 miles from the prison, riding a stolen bicycle on a canal towpath. This is how Daniel Khalif did it. Born to a British-Iranian single mother, Khalif joined the British Army at 16 years old. Young, ambitious, and according to a fellow recruit who chose to remain anonymous, desperate for attention. That recruit described Khalif as cocky and arrogant, a man who always wanted the spotlight, who always needed everyone in the room to know his name, who always insisted he was smarter than everybody else. The kind of person who made himself impossible to ignore. Khalif served in the Royal Signals, a corps responsible for military communications. He had access to classified systems, access to names, access to documents that most soldiers his age would never see. And within months of joining, he began using that access in ways no one anticipated. Less than a year after enlisting, Khalif appeared in a North London park. He collected 15,000 pounds in a dog poo bag from Iranian intelligence agents. 2 years after joining the army, he sat in a smart hotel in Istanbul, speaking with his handler. Khalif told the Iranians he wanted to be trained inside Iran. He described himself as one of the most intelligent people around. He said he was better than everybody, more intelligent than everybody. In a message, he promised to work for them for more than 25 years. But Khalif also contacted MI5 anonymously. He told British intelligence he wanted to become a double agent, that he wanted to help them. MI5 didn't take him seriously. Instead, they had him arrested. What would a man like that do when backed into a corner? Wait quietly for trial? That first arrest didn't stop him. Before being taken into custody, Khalif had sent the Iranians photographs of military communication equipment and official strategy documents. He had upgraded a document to secret classification, but misspelled the word. He had collected the names of serving soldiers, including members of the SAS and the SBS. 15 names photographed and handed over to Iranian intelligence. And it got worse. He created a fake document about Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian citizen detained in Iran for 6 years. The document claimed the British government was unwilling to negotiate her release. If the Iranians had believed it, the consequences could have been severe. The court later heard that Khalif could have endangered her life. In 2023, Khalif left a fake explosive device on a desk at his barracks in Staffordshire. Then he ran. Police found 18,000 pounds in the van he had been living in. He was recaptured, charged under the Terrorism Act and the Official Secrets Act. And that was how he ended up at Wandsworth Prison on remand, awaiting trial, facing charges that could put him away for a very long time. But instead of waiting for court, Khalif was watching. He was counting time. He was building a plan. Why would a man facing decades in prison risk adding more years to his sentence? Because Khalif wasn't the kind of man who waited for someone else to decide his fate. Wandsworth Prison was one of the largest and oldest prisons in England. Classified as Category B, the second highest security level in the British prison system. Hundreds of people pass through its gates every day. Each one handled according to category, not instinct. But there was a problem. A former governor of Belmarsh Prison, the highest security facility in the country, said it plainly. Khalif should not have been at Wandsworth. With the terrorism charges he was facing, he should have been held at a Category A facility. where security was at its highest, where supervision was constant. Why was he at Wandsworth? That question would haunt the system long after the escape. Wandsworth ran on routine. Doors opened and closed at the same hours. Delivery vehicles arrived through the same gates. Staff rotated through shifts that overlapped just enough to keep things moving. That consistency allowed the prison to function at scale, but it also allowed someone patient to study every detail. Daily life inside Wandsworth was governed by repetition. Officers moved from one task to the next. Counts were taken at scheduled intervals. Deliveries arrived and departed through the same checkpoints. The rhythm was familiar enough that no single moment stood out. Khalife was not known as disruptive. There were no reports of violence, no recorded threats to staff, no disciplinary incidents. On paper, he didn't look like someone who would attempt an escape, let alone succeed. That profile shaped how he was handled. In a prison stretched by overcrowding, staff attention gravitated toward immediate problems, the loud inmate, the aggressive one. Khalif did none of those things. He blended into the administrative background. His military background was known, but it didn't automatically translate into heightened daily supervision. Former soldiers aren't rare in British prisons. Many serve their time quietly. The assumption, reinforced by his behavior, was that he would wait for court. But what if the quiet ones are the most dangerous? Khalif was assigned to work in the prison kitchen. From that position, he could see when vehicles arrived. He could see which checks were thorough and which were treated as formalities. He could see which routines were enforced and which had faded into habit. And the biggest gap in the system? Vehicle inspections were designed to prevent contraband from coming in, not to prevent people from going out. He didn't need to break a door. He didn't need to dig a tunnel. He didn't need a weapon. He only needed to understand that the most secure places are often guarded by habits, not suspicion. And once he recognized that, the danger was no longer whether he would try to leave. It was whether anyone would notice before he did. Inside the prison, risk was measured by behavior, not potential. Khalif didn't present as a threat in the traditional sense. He was compliant. He followed rules. He didn't test boundaries in obvious ways. That distinction mattered because Wandsworth wasn't designed to isolate every individual as a unique case. It was designed to manage volume. The question wasn't whether he would try. The question was whether anyone would notice before it was too late. How do you escape from a prison without breaking a single rule in front of a single witness? Khalif's plan didn't rely on speed. It relied on patience. A few days before September 6th, he began preparing. His materials were ordinary, kitchen trousers, the kind every inmate working in the prison kitchen wore. No one would notice if a pair went missing. Khalif tore the trousers into strips, tied them together, knotted them carefully, created a crude but functional sling strong enough to support a man's body weight. He had to test the strength of each knot. He had to find a way to conceal the sling without drawing attention. All of it required quiet, uninterrupted time and confidence that small anomalies wouldn't attract scrutiny. Nothing about the prison environment suggested urgency. There was no lockdown, no alert, no reason for staff to believe that any particular day would require extra attention. Delivery vehicles were among the few objects allowed to cross the prison boundary repeatedly. They entered secure areas, stopped, idled, and left. Inspections existed, but they were shaped by experience. Drivers were known. Schedules were tight. Checks were brief. A few days before the escape, Khalif attached the sling to the rear axle of a food delivery truck inside the prison compound. The sling hung there waiting. No one checked. Remember that sling. It was about to carry a man through the front gate of a British prison. How did a prisoner access the underside of a vehicle without being seen? That question remained under review. Officials did not agree on a single timeline. But what was clear was that no physical struggle occurred. No rules were overtly broken in front of witnesses. This wasn't the plan of a desperate man acting on impulse. This was the plan of someone who understood that repetition creates blindness, that when people do the same thing every day, they stop seeing what's right in front of them. He didn't need doors to break. He needed everyone to keep doing exactly what they'd always done. And that was exactly what happened. The morning of September 6th, 2023, Wandsworth Prison. Everything moved the way mornings always did. Gates opened on schedule. Vehicles queued, were waved through, and moved on. Nothing stood out as unusual. Security cameras recorded Khalife working in the kitchen. 15 minutes later, he was gone. The food delivery van sat in the prison compound, engine idling. Khalif moved into position. He crawled beneath the vehicle, slid his body into the sling that had been secured days earlier, locked himself against the metal frame. The space was narrow, the ground clearance unforgiving. Once he was in place, there was no turning back without exposure. One slip, one loose knot, and he'd be dragged across asphalt at traffic speed. What if the fabric tore? What if a guard decided to walk around the van one more time? From above, the van looked exactly as it always had. From the side, nothing appeared altered. No one had reason to crouch down and look underneath. That assumption wasn't negligence in isolation. It was routine, reinforced by repetition every single day. The engine started. The vehicle rolled forward. Khalife's body moved with it, inches from the pavement. Every vibration transmitted through metal. Every turn shifted his weight. He was fully dependent on knots holding under strain and on the driver following the same smooth route he always did. The driver had no idea. The same route he drove every week. The same gates. The same checkpoints. He couldn't feel the extra weight beneath the chassis. He couldn't hear the fabric straining against the axle. As far as he was concerned, it was an ordinary morning. The van cleared the internal checkpoint. No one stopped it. It approached the exit gate. That moment carried no significance to anyone watching. Vehicles exited all day. Officers monitored screens and paperwork, not the underside of a delivery truck. Would anyone stop the van? Would anyone bend down and look? The gate opened. The van crossed the boundary. At that instant, the escape was already beyond the point where staff could react. Khalife was no longer contained by walls or locks. He was suspended between detection and freedom, relying on the same invisibility that had protected him moments earlier. Inside the prison, the system continued to function as designed. Counts would be taken later. Absences would be noticed later. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the most controlled part of the escape was already over. But then the alarm sounded. The prison discovered a prisoner was missing, and the van was still allowed to leave. Why? That question would become one of the 81 security failures documented afterward. Outside the prison walls, London traffic introduced variables Khalif couldn't control. Speed changes, red lights, curbs, cameras. He remained hidden beneath the van, but only as long as no one looked where they weren't trained to look. The van moved deeper into the city, carrying food on top and a fugitive beneath. The distance between Khalife and the prison grew with every block. At any moment, the entire plan could collapse without warning. A hard break, a pothole, a strap slipping just enough. Cars pulled close. Cyclists passed inches away. Pedestrians crossed without looking down. Every stop sent force through his arms. Every bump compressed space that barely existed. The metal frame above him vibrated constantly, transmitting sound and heat. If a knot failed, there would be no warning and no recovery. How long could he hold on? And would anyone recognize him when he let go? The van stopped at a traffic light. A motorist driving behind looked down and saw something impossible. A man rolling out from under a food truck. He did a pencil roll on the road, stood up, flicked his fringe, and casually walked away. Daniel Khalif was free. No shouting. No chase. No police. Just a man stepping into a London morning as if he belonged there. He didn't run. He walked. Blended into the pavement crowd. One face among millions. For the first time since his arrest, no walls, no bars, no one counting heads, just freedom. But freedom outside prison walls didn't mean safety. He was on foot in one of the most surveilled cities in the world, carrying no uniform, no visible restraints, and no reason for anyone nearby to recognize him. Yet. But how long could that freedom last? Inside Wandsworth Prison, the system lagged behind reality. Counts weren't instantaneous. Movement logs were checked after transitions, not during them. When Khalif failed to appear where he was expected, it didn't immediately trigger alarm. Absence had to be confirmed. Paperwork had to catch up to the physical world. That delay mattered. By the time staff recognized Khalif was missing, the escape itself was already complete. The question was no longer how to stop it. It was how far he'd gone before anyone started looking. The response began to form, but it moved at institutional speed. Notifications were made. Supervisors were alerted. CCTV was reviewed in reverse, frame by frame, searching for a moment that should have stood out and didn't. Within hours of the escape being confirmed, Khalif's image moved from internal briefings to public warnings. The Metropolitan Police Service circulated his photograph nationally. They told the public not to approach him. A massive manhunt began. Transport hubs, patrol cars, and control rooms shifted focus. Huge queues built up at airports, including Stansted, Gatwick, Heathrow, Manchester, and Glasgow. A £2,000 reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. What had begun as a procedural failure inside a prison was now a citywide emergency. But urgency doesn't equal precision. London was built to absorb people. Millions moved through the city every day without leaving a trace that lasted more than seconds. Khalif didn't disappear into wilderness. He didn't flee the country. He stayed inside the city, inside the density where attention was spread thin and faces blurred together. Instead of hiding, he surfaced. Cameras picked him up in ordinary places. Retail stores, public walkways. He appeared calm enough to blend in, moving at a pace that didn't invite scrutiny. By 5 that same afternoon, cameras spotted Khalif 6 miles away in Richmond. He was wearing shorts, walking past the White Cross pub, then stepping into a Mountain Warehouse store. Inside the shop, he looked straight at the CCTV camera. Then he stole a baseball cap, put it in his bag. A stolen cap. That was his entire disguise plan. Would it be enough? That was the only attempt at disguise the cameras recorded. No dramatic change of appearance. No frantic effort to vanish. He moved with enough calm to blend in. Enough confidence that no one looked twice. The next morning, he received cash from an unknown contact, used it to buy more clothes at Marks & Spencer, then read about his own escape in the newspapers. But fame cut both ways. His face was now on every news broadcast. Anyone who'd seen the alerts carried the possibility of recognition. Every shop entrance, every bus stop, every street corner added friction to his movement. People began calling the police. Among them was Frank Noon, who spotted Khalif in a cemetery in Chiswick. Noon later said he actually felt sorry for the man, that for someone who was Britain's most wanted, Khalif didn't look scary at all. Each appearance on camera shortened the distance between his last known location and the next police move. Khalif was still free, but that freedom was conditional. Dependent on timing he could no longer fully control. Police closed Richmond Park entirely, the largest park in Greater London, sealed off. Helicopters swept overhead. Infrared equipment scanned every square meter of ground. But Khalif wasn't there. Where was he? Not where anyone expected. He was moving by bicycle, along canal towpaths and shared paths where no one expected to see a fugitive. The same visibility that increased the chance of being spotted also reduced suspicion. People don't look twice at someone who looks like they belong. But the gap between freedom and capture was narrowing every hour. Patrols were repositioned. Armed units placed on standby. Commanders focused on likely corridors of movement, transit routes, green spaces, areas where someone on foot or bicycle could pass unnoticed for a while. Behind the scenes, the police response tightened. Sightings came in from different parts of the city, sometimes minutes apart. Each report forced investigators to decide what was reliable and what was noise. Acting on every tip risked spreading resources too thin. Ignoring one risked letting him slip through. CCTV networks were pulled into alignment, replaying hours of footage forward and backward. Analysts marked timestamps and locations, trying to build a pattern. Was he moving towards somewhere specific or simply staying ahead of the response? The window between escape and response is where most breakouts collapse. It's the moment when mistakes happen, when someone runs too fast or hides too poorly. Khalif did neither. He moved with restraint, aware that attention would arrive eventually. But time was the one thing he no longer had. What happened next ended the most embarrassing prison escape in modern British history. Day 3. Exactly 75 hours after escaping Wandsworth Prison. Khalif was riding a stolen bicycle along a canal towpath in Northolt, North London, 11 miles from Wandsworth Prison. That was the total distance he'd managed to cover in 3 days. A plainclothes police officer recognized him. No dramatic chase. No gunfire. No resistance. No attempt to flee. Khalif simply stopped. He was arrested on the towpath. The most wanted man in Britain, caught not by helicopters or infrared scanners, but by one officer who happened to be in the right place at the right time. And according to testimony heard in court, Khalif's first reaction was to congratulate the detective. 3 days, 1 smiles. Ended on a canal towpath by an officer not wearing a uniform. The most audacious prison escape in Britain in decades ended not with a bang, but with a quiet handshake. Khalif was returned to custody within hours of his arrest. This time under restrictions that left no room for improvisation. Escort vehicles were searched twice. Every movement was logged, checked, and rechecked. The escape was formally added to the charges he already faced, treated not as an embarrassment to be managed quietly, but as a criminal act with its own consequences. At Woolwich Crown Court, Khalif faced 4 counts. Count 1. Committing an act prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state under the Official Secrets Act. In other words, spying for Iran. Count 2. Eliciting information about members of the armed forces under the Terrorism Act. Count 3. Perpetrating a bomb hoax. Count 4. Escaping from prison. Prosecutors argued that the escape demonstrated planning, deception, and a willingness to exploit institutional trust. His defense barrister tried a different approach. He described Khalif's double agent plot as hapless, sometimes bordering on the slapstick. More Scooby-Doo than 007. Did the jury buy it? The jury did not agree. Khalif was found guilty on counts 1 and 2. Spying for Iran. collecting information on special forces personnel. He was found not guilty on count 3, the bomb hoax. And during the trial itself, he changed his plea on count 4, admitting that he had escaped from Wandsworth prison on September 6th. When the verdict was read, Kalife showed no visible reaction beyond adjusting his glasses. The judge made clear that he would face a long custodial sentence. What stood out was what Kalife had told police after being caught. He claimed it had never crossed his mind that leaving prison was a crime. A former soldier accused of espionage escaped from custody and claimed he didn't know it was illegal. While the case advanced through the courts, the prison he'd left behind entered a different process. An internal review was ordered at Wandsworth under public pressure and parliamentary scrutiny. The final report stopped short of naming any individual at fault. Instead, it described a culture shaped by repetition and time pressure, where procedures existed on paper, but eroded in practice. Several staff members were suspended pending disciplinary review. Training protocols were revised. Search procedures were standardized and logged digitally. Oversight of contractor movements was tightened. These changes were not presented as innovations. They were corrections, steps meant to restore standards that had faded over time. The Metropolitan Police Service reviewed its coordination with correctional authorities. Public alerts issued during the manhunt were examined for speed and clarity. Officials acknowledged that Kalife's visibility in public exposed a gap between perception and control. He hadn't been hiding. He'd been moving through systems that assumed he couldn't be there. The lasting impact of this escape was not the distance Kalife traveled. 1 miles. 3 days. Barely a footnote on a map. It was what it revealed. That one of Britain's largest prisons could be defeated. Not by force, not by technology, but by patience and a pair of kitchen trousers. That 81 security failures could accumulate without anyone noticing. That routine, the very thing that keeps a system running, is also the thing that makes it blind. When security depends on people doing the same thing every day without pause, where does responsibility really sit? With those who exploit the gap, or with the moments no one thinks to stop and look? Daniel Kalife is back behind bars. Found guilty of espionage, found guilty of escaping custody, facing a long sentence. But the question this case left behind isn't about him. It's about the system. About walls that look solid, but are guarded by assumptions. About procedures that exist on paper, but vanish in practice. About the distance between design and execution. The system corrected itself only after exposure forced it to. Procedures were rewritten. Staff were retrained. But the conditions that allowed those procedures to fade remain familiar across institutions built on routine. And about the simple truth that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one who breaks down the door. It's the one who knows that nobody bothers to look underneath. And that brings us to the end of our story.